to the Shop, episode 345, a conversation with 2022 U.S. Cup Tasters champion Julien Langevin. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. I would really encourage you to subscribe to Keys to the Shop. Just hit that button that says subscribe wherever you're listening to these podcasts. And that would be awesome because it'll keep you up to date with all the new content coming out on a monthly basis. And also, if you could share these episodes with a friend or somebody that you know can really benefit from the content, that would be amazing. Share it with your team. Just spread the word about Keys to the Shop. It's a big industry out there, and more people need to be exposed to these great ideas, just like the ones you're going to find in today's episode with Julien Langevin. So thank you very much for doing that. Now, Keys to the Shop is offering consulting and coaching for you and your business. So what that looks like is you get to work directly with me to help you either start your coffee business off on the right foot from the very beginning, or take what you already have as an existing operator and level up your operations, people, and quality. That can happen a lot of different ways, either on site or remotely through consultations and coachings over the phone. But there's a lot we can learn by just getting on the phone and talking. And I would love to have that opportunity to learn more about where you are in your business and how Keys to the Shop consulting might be able to help you. So to do that, all you need to do is set up a free discovery call by emailing chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS @keystotheshop.com. And we'll see if working with Keys to the Shop Consulting is the right fit for you. Again, that email for Keys to the Shop Consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, today's episode of Keys to the Shop is brought to you by the Ground Control Cyclops Brewer from Voga Coffee. Absolutely changing the game when it comes to what you can expect from batch brewers in the coffee industry. We haven't seen very much innovation in terms of what batch brewers can do. That's until the ground control came around and really elevated the flavor profile of batch brew through its SCA award-winning technology. It gives you an incredible control over a variety of flavors in your coffee that you didn't even know could be extracted. And it's not just a next level batch brewer. It also makes tea. It can make batched iced lattes, batched cold brew. So it not only improves the quality of what you're offering your customers and helps shine a better light on your coffee, it also increases the efficiency and workflow of your coffee bar. You really should check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee for more information. If you're looking for that efficiency, if you're looking for excellence in coffee and to really get the edge in terms of what you offer your customers, then I think you should be looking at getting a Ground Control Cyclops brewer in your store. Again, for more information, go and visit them over at groundcontrol.coffee. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Pacific Barista series. These beverages are made for and tested by professional baristas around the globe before they are ever launched into the marketplace. That's why it stands up to the heat from steaming, produces awesome texture for latte art, and also allows the beverage to be focused on the coffee. So you don't get the overwhelming flavor of the actual beverage itself. It's just a great balance. All of this works together to create this memorable experience for your plant-based customers. So go visit them over at pacificfoodservice.com and get it in your store and try it out for yourself. I think you're really going to love it. And if, again, you want your beverages to be world-class and offer your customers the best possible experience, then I think you need to be using the Barista series from Pacific. Okay, everyone. Well, today we are going to be talking with a champion named Julien Langevin, who is the 2022 U.S. Cup Tasters champion, just recently crowned in Boston during the SCA Global Expo. Julien Langevin is the production roaster for Coffee by Design in Portland, Maine. And Langevin only just began learning how to roast coffee after working for about 4 years or so as a barista in different iterations, taking a brief hiatus from the industry to try his hand at being an electrician. And his first real coffee job was at Starbucks and worked through various shops in Portland while achieving his bachelor's degree in fine arts. After graduating, he began to go to SCA events, acting as a volunteer, a sensory judge for the Barista competitions, and then competing in the Nashville Cup Tasters qualifier in 2020. After a 2.5-year separation from the coffee community, Langevin found his way back to coffee and is now the current 2022 U.S. Cup Tasters champion. And I'll tell you what, yeah, even the fact that Julien has been in the industry for these 4 years or 4 or 5 years, it seems like this has been time well spent, considering the great insights that he gives in this conversation around the idea of tasting coffee. And I mentioned this to Julien in our conversations, and I'll give you just a heads up that I think the way that Julien approaches the idea of tasting coffee and how to just think about these things visually is really a great technique, and I love the way Julien's mind works around these things. So we're going to talk about the journey and challenges of Julien's coffee career, techniques for tasting, preparations for Tasters Cup, challenges in the competition, how to stay focused, visualization, like I just mentioned, and then advice to anybody else who is looking to improve their sensory skills and just make a go of it really well in coffee. I think Julien provides a really great inspiration here. So happy to be able to talk with him today. So without further ado, let's get right to this conversation. Here now is my interview with the U.S. Cup Tasters champion, Julien Langevin. All right, Julien, welcome to Keys to the Shop, and a big congratulations to you. How are you?
Thank you so much, Chris. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm doing great. I'm very excited to be here and still kind of taking in everything day by day, but I'm really grateful and happy.
Well, it's a big thing to process for sure, and it feels nerve-wracking to watch for me because immediately. And there's a different kind of nerve-wracking that goes with something like Barista, where you have to wait until the very end. But it's like, I feel like there's this pressure that you just really have to, it's uniquely set up to like stress you out consistently the entire time.
Yeah, it's weird because, right, like in the qualifier in Nashville, 2 years ago, I just remember being so terrified, like to be up there. And I, for some reason in Boston, just did not feel that way. And I'm like very thankful because it gave me the space to kind of enjoy myself and talk to people and have space outside of the competition. But it is nerve wracking. On Friday, the first time I competed in round one, I was pretty nervous, but I tried to kind of alter my mindset to liken it more to excitement, I guess, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a whole TED talk about that. They talk about like nervousness is your body's way of telling you that something exciting is going to happen. You can psych yourself out one way or another. It might as well be in the excitement category, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, okay, so let's back up a little bit before we get into like talking about the competition and stuff. I'm interested in your history in coffee and where your love for the sensory elements or just coffee in general came from. So take us back to when that happened for you.
So my first coffee job was, I was 18 and I worked at a Starbucks, and I worked there for about 3 or 4 months. And it was crazy. It was a crazy job, workflow, everything, customers. And I was, just a young person. It was my first real job. And it was funny, after I started to be trained on bar, I would literally have dreams about like steaming milk and like the repetitive action of pulling shots. Right. And I ended up leaving Starbucks. I ended up working as a barista for about a little over 3 years on and off through my undergrad in Portland, Maine. I drank only dark roast up until like 2018. And then I worked at a shop that was geared a little bit more towards specialty, and I started learning about single origin, light roasts, and tasting notes. We did cuppings once a month, and I started to kind of realize, oh, okay, like this is something that's cool and I might be kind of good at. I don't know. And it was fun. And I really liked being a barista and I liked working in coffee. And so it kind of stuck for a little while, at least.
Okay. What do you mean for a little while, at least? Was there a moment where it didn't?
Yeah. Well, actually, so I was working at this shop for 2.5 years, gearing up to go into a quality control position. And I started getting trained on like green grading and quality control, setting up to take the queue eventually. And COVID hit.
Oh, right.
And, I was working mostly full time as a barista in the shop. And it got really hard really fast to keep my mindset and keep grounded. And I was going through like a lot of mental health struggles and also like transitioning. I'm trans, and so doing that in like a public setting was like really hard. And I ended up actually making the super hard decision to like leave the industry for over a year, late fall of 2020, and I've only been back for about 5 months.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I worked as an electrician for my dad's company in Central Maine. And drank like pre-ground Pete's dark roast on my like 4-cup Mr. Coffee, just like kind of drowning it in oat milk, not really thinking about trying not to think about coffee too much.
Right. Just get the caffeine
really hard.
going.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so you were creating this career path, basically. You were in this mode where you were pursuing the queue, and the flavors of coffee were becoming, very much more clear to you. And any one of us that have been through this find that very exciting. Like, what else is there beyond this? This is, it's unfolding and it's showing you all of these different layers, and it's really great. So then to leave it, yes, oh my gosh, and that would be kind of devastating to, I imagine, think about what you could be missing in there. But it's encouraging in a way to hear that you were able to make such a hard decision to leave something just for your own benefit in the midst of all of the, transitioning and the upheaval in the world. But then you made your way back into coffee, and it's been 5 months, but what an entry back in. I mean, how did it feel when let's start with how you got back in. Like, what precipitated that decision? Why'd you just jump back in?
Okay, so I have bipolar disorder, and I actually I had to leave the electrical field because I went back into an inpatient program, and I literally couldn't return to work. I was like so traumatized, and it was like probably like the worst couple of months of my life, but also the coolest because I got the diagnosis, and so I could treat it well, and then like I ended up working at a restaurant and kind of like redoing their coffee program, which was really exciting. And that was really exciting. And then I had moved out of Portland, where I had lived previously for a long time. And I was just living in this town called Auburn that I'd actually grown up in Central Maine. And I was like, I need to, like, all my friends were in Portland. I was like, I need to move back to Portland. So I started applying for jobs, and Coffee by Design was hiring for a production position in their roastery. And I was like, oh, I've never worked in production before, but it's coffee, so I'd probably like it. So I interviewed and got the job pretty quickly and started commuting back and forth, and eventually moved back. When I interviewed, they were like, oh, we kind of need someone to learn how to roast. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool. So a couple months after I got hired, I got trained to roast by our head roaster, Travis Spear, and got to cup on and off with Jeremy Rivara, our director of coffee. And it was a fast transition back into the industry, but it felt very natural, and everyone was so supportive there, and it just felt very good,
Yeah, it must feel pretty redeeming.
Yeah,
and so I'm
definitely.
glad that was the kind of reception you had entering back into the industry. And so sorry to hear about all of the struggles that you've had to go through in the last couple of years. But I am so grateful to hear that it feels like you picked up without losing anything.
Yeah. And in a way, like, being an electrician kind of helped me with roasting because I was doing a lot of troubleshooting and everything that happened, I don't really think was bad. It just kind of happened and it was all like it got me to where I am now. So I'm grateful for it all.
Exactly. That's a good point about being an electrician. That's a unique skill set that not a lot of coffee professionals can say they have. Okay, so now 5 months in, you're learning to roast. You're back at the cupping table and tasting coffees. Now, what is it like to start to really hone in your palate, and what kind of challenges did you have to overcome to really reach the next level once you were back in coffee, where it's not just like an interesting thing that you're tasting all these coffees. Now it's like quite literally your job, or it's even more so your job than before. What is it that what made all the difference in terms of how you kind of professionalized it at this leg of your career?
So I guess the biggest hurdle that I had to overcome was time, I guess. Because, my main position is production. I work mostly on the floor, bagging coffee, weigh filling, making bags. So I think just carving out time to get to cup with Travis and Jeremy, or get to come in before production and do triangulations, and kind of like knowing my limits as far as like what I could put in, like as far as like exhaustion or like overworking myself, and when to push harder and when to pull back. And also just like feeling confident in my position, because when I never really truly made it to the QC position. I never really made it to like full-time production roaster, but just like, and not saying I never will, but like just kind of seeing where I'm at, being okay with that position, and knowing that like just because I'm not in one of those like higher QC positions doesn't mean I can't develop my skills, I don't know.
Well, I guess it means that there isn't as much pressure, except for the pressure you put on yourself to develop those things, which may actually give you a little bit more freedom than somebody else.
Right. And I think that specifically in terms of like competing, like I did not feel the pressure of being up there because I really like didn't have much to lose. I was just happy to be on the stage that I never thought I'd ever get to see. And I think that took away whatever nerves I had in the beginning. And not saying I didn't have any nerves, but like I think just that's the most important part, I think, with competing, is just like being comfortable. And that was something I learned from Steve Cuevas when we met at Counterculture. They kindly opened up their space to Cup Tasters competitors to practice before our competition. And he was like, you got to just like keep your heart rate low. You got to stay grounded. Don't focus on anything else. And like, I just held on to that throughout the weekend, and it really helped.
Yeah. So you mentioned that earlier, how you were just having to be in a calm state and turn the nerves into excitement. And what's the difference between tasting coffee when you're in this tense state versus relaxed?
So it's kind of like, I think of tasting as like one of the most grounded exercises I do, at least. When I'm going through a set of triangulations, I am so focused on just physically what's happening in my mouth. And like, so I have mental health issues. So I have a lot of practice in like training my brain to like not think a certain way or think a certain way. And so whenever I would begin to like hear my thoughts kind of trail off from what I was tasting, it was like snap back and like just focus on like what's happening. So I'm like a creative person. I went to art school. I'm a painter, and I enter like a flow state very often where it's like hyper focus. And I like, to me, like tasting is like very similar to the flow state I enter when I'm painting, where it's like I don't see anything else outside of it.
Would you say that you kind of visualize also when you're tasting?
Yes, definitely. And I kind of think it's funny. Like I've talked with a few people now about like synesthesia like things where if I taste something, I don't really know what it is in terms of a flavor call. I'll think of like a color or like a texture. And that is really helpful in triangulation specifically because, right, you're only trying to discover differences. So if you can simplify it as much as you can, then those differences become way more pronounced.
I love that. It's a long time ago. There was this. There's a podcast called The Model Health Show. It's kind of like a holistic health show, but there was a mantra or a set of questions. I'm not sure if it was Buddhist or whatever it was. It was meditative. When you have a headache, to ask yourself the question, where is my headache? What color is it? What shape is it? And keep on asking yourself the question, and it gives form to something that's amorphous. And it's actually weird how it, over 10 or 12 times, it actually goes away as you visualize it. And as you're talking about visualization, for baristas that are getting all sorts of sensory inputs on the bar, like if you're dialing in a coffee, but you're also super stressed out while you're doing it, how are you supposed to really be paying attention to these flavor calls when you're supposed to be off your shift, but have to keep making these, you know what I mean? Like that's a very practical exercise.
Yeah. And that's, being a barista, even though I loved it, it was like one of the hardest jobs I've ever had because of that, having to like ground yourself, and there's like 30 to 50 people in your cafe or whatever, and then you're like trying to dial in and like multitasking and cleaning and serving customers and pulling shots, and it's all very overwhelming. So as much, I wasn't very good at it when I was a barista, like grounding myself, but as much as you can ground yourself in any aspect, like it's probably going to help you in the long run.
Do you do this also with food and things?
I kind of, I guess, like I try to be mindful when I eat, but also, right, like I'm doing manual labor all day. So when I'm eating, like I kind of just like I'm trying to get calories in my body. And so I'm not as good at it. But when I like go out to eat or like have a food I've never tried before, I am like very attentive, and I do try to like taste it because I'm like, oh, like I don't know if I'll ever taste this again, so I should probably taste it and think about it. Right.
Yeah, and it gives you more opportunity to hone those skills, I guess. So in terms of the competition, when you decided that you wanted to compete in this, what did you start to do to prepare for it?
So when I was a barista preparing for it, I kind of knew, okay, I need to do something that will let me focus on tasting, which is not something like I dial in espresso, but I'm not really tasting brewed coffee or lots of brewed coffee every day, like someone who's in a cupping lab all day, you know what I mean? And I guess I had the same approach when training for nationals. Was like, I knew that I was going up against Q graders, green buyers, and I was like, I have to just like do whatever I can to try to get myself to their level. Because I'm not tasting hundreds of cups a day. I'm not, doing stuff like that. So I basically I went in every day, like an hour and a half before production started, and set up 8 sets of triangulations for myself. And also just kind of like ate bland food like a couple weeks up, didn't really drink alcohol. I'm definitely the kind of person where like if I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna go 100. I kind of just did it, and I didn't know if it was gonna pay off. I was just like, I have one shot at this, and I'm gonna do whatever I can to try to make it count. And I guess it did.
So I guess it did. Yeah, it totally worked out. And when you say you're going to go 100%, like, okay, so if I personally wanted to apply myself in a certain area, like a skill or exercise and a skill, I'll have to have tools at my disposal to say, okay, I'm going to use these things like crazy. I'm going to go 100% at this. But if I don't have a good set of tools, then I'm no matter how hard I try, I'm not going to make it very far. And if I even just adopt new tools that I'm not very familiar with, it might be even more difficult. How much of your preparation was just really leaning into tried and true practices and tools, and how much was adopting new tools to help you just go a little bit further?
I'm going to answer it two different ways because I think it is applicable to how I learned how to paint. So in terms of preparing for the competition, I work in a roastery, and we happen to do a lot of specialty blends. And so I was very lucky that I had a lot of different blend components that I could choose from for my triangulations. That's not something I had 2 years ago, and it's not something a lot of people have, like novices like myself, have access to. So I am very grateful, and I think that contributed a lot to like my success in the competition. But I mean, in terms of like not having access to those resources, when I made the decision when I was in high school to go to art school, I was like not very good at painting. And I had a few people tell me so. And I kind of was like, well, I'm going to get really good at painting. And so I just used like cheap acrylic paints and whatever brushes I could find, and just like tried my best with my tools that I had to develop like techniques. And that's something that is a thing I think you can do with tasting, is like developing a technique can sometimes be more valuable than the tools or coffees you have access to. Like one thing I did throughout the past couple months was just like every time I had a drip coffee, or like every time I had a beverage, I like wasn't just drinking it for the caffeine, but I was tasting every single sip and feeling every single sip in my mouth, analyzing it over and over again, because right, it's the same coffee. And then once you do that enough with different coffees, you start to realize that like, oh, those coffees feel different. Not only do they taste different, but they feel different. And so I perfected like this technique in, you know, it's different for everyone. Tasting is different for everyone, but like, you know, like everyone's physiology is different. You know how your palate operates. And if you can just dial that in and hone that in, then if you don't have access to the tools, then at least you have that.
Back to that kind of visualization in a sense, because you're giving dimension to things that in a normal tasting scenario, you just don't have time for, in a sense. You're like,
right.
How long did it take you to get to the point where you could pick out the signal from the noise in those harder to reach, deeper down, we'll say personality traits of those coffees?
I think just honestly, like reps, like repetition. That was something Travis, our head roaster, you know, said to me early on in training, was like, you know, if you just do it enough, like it'll become natural. And that's why I was in 5 days a week doing sets, was like, once you are familiar with the repetition of the movement of the action, then you start to think about it less, and you can focus on the coffee, and you can focus on the other sensations that are happening in your mouth, which is ultimately what matters when you're up on that stage, right? Like when I got up on that stage for finals, there was like maybe like 30 people sitting in the chairs. And then by the time I moved my last cup forward, there was like 60 or 70 people. And I had no perception of all those people coming over to watch. Like I was just gone, you know? Yep, so like It was really, if you can just like focus, I don't know how to say, like if you can focus on what's happening in your mouth, because that's what matters. Like just, and for me, it was reps. For me, it was just like getting comfortable running through 8 sets, and like, but it's different for everyone. You know?
Yeah, I have the a meditation app on my phone that, you know, you're supposed to focus on your breath or some point to return your focus to. And when we talk about focusing on what's going on your palate and your mouth, I keep thinking about that as the coffee professional's meditative practice. You know.
Yeah.
Well, were there coffees that were harder? Or let me say this, are there coffees that are harder in general to taste, where it's not just about zeroing in on the personality and dimensionality of the coffee, but it's like a lot of extra effort has to be put into it because it throws you a curveball. Like, what are the curveball coffees that add more complexity to the intuitive equation here?
You know, I mean, that's something I learned, from talking to other competitors and like myself, just like in practice, is like it varies for everyone, obviously. For me, it's naturals. One of the last sets I did was like 7 sets of naturals against each other. And
wow.
like I just really tried to like stress out my mouth to like disassociate enough so that I could focus. But like for me, it's naturals. I know I talked to someone and they were like, oh, like the roast quality was really distracting. And that's the thing with competition, is like you never know what the coffees are going to be like. So they could be your weakness or they could be your strength. I know, I think it was in quarterfinals, like I think the one set I got wrong was naturals, and I was like kicking myself because I was like, I knew it. But like, the sets got progressively harder. There were definitely more naturals that I did get right, but it's like, just that one, I was like, of course it was the natural set.
Yeah,
But
you knew it was gonna happen.
yeah. But I mean, like you can't really do anything about it. And that was the thing. Like, one of the MCs, I think, was asking us about the sets, like if we had any we struggled with or weren't sure about. And I just said, like, once I push a cup forward, it's done. It's out of my mind. Like it's out of my control. So,
Oh yeah. That's
yeah.
interesting too, because like there could be a lot of leftover just regret, and if you don't learn how to cut that off, then you're just going to not do well the next set.
Right. And it's so like I can't stress that enough. Like by no means do I think I'm the best coffee taster in the US. Like not at all. But like for some reason I was like able to, I think, develop the mindset to where like I could like separate myself from the stress of it enough to make it to the final round and win. And like again, like I was not expecting to win. And every time I moved on, I was like totally cool with being knocked out wherever I was at. I was like, oh cool, semifinals. Oh cool, finalist. Oh my god, okay, I just won. And it's like, that I think that really helped me because like I literally had no expectations going in to even advance. And it was funny because like we were sending people down, a couple people down from the roastery I worked at, like to watch on Saturday, and I was like, man, it would be really cool if I just made it to Saturday so they could see me compete. And then yeah, so
I want to go back to naturals a little bit. By the time this episode airs, we're going to have already had a Rate of Rise episode talking about roasting for different emerging processes, like pulp naturals or anaerobic fermentation and things. When you're talking about stressing your mouth to focus on these naturals and, how I imagine, and tell me if this is true or not, like the process itself could cloud your judgment about what the differences are between the coffees. Like, what is the thing that you kind of have to sort out in naturals that's unique to that versus washed?
Yeah, so I feel like with washed, it's like the natural, like the terroir is so much more perceivable. Whereas like with naturals, it's more ferment and those like like I love naturals. They're like my favorite kinds of coffees, anaerobics, like all these crazy like processing methods I love. But like it gets tricky when you have them in a triangulation because, right, and I'll go back to color, whereas like I'll be tasting a set of naturals and I'll have to literally like be like, is that more purple or blue? That one's blue. That one's purple and blue. Okay, they're both purple. That one's more red. And like, I don't even know if I'm like thinking about the acidity or like what, but it's more like just like the vibe or like the quality. It's very, for some reason for me, it's like very difficult, especially when I have like 7 sets of wash and then 1 natural, because, you can like kind of calibrate to it. And that's why like when I did the 7 sets, I actually did better than I had expected, because you start to like calibrate to the similarities. But then once you have like a bunch of wash and then 1 natural, all those naturals just like taste the same.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And I love the way you think about these things. I personally think it's really helpful to have that framework when you're making a decision to ascribe those attributes. And it's especially important simply because there are just an enormous number of emerging processes out there that any of us who are in coffee will either be describing to a consumer at the shop, or we're going to be in the position of making decisions about how to roast that coffee or describe that coffee. So it's a really sort of an emerging skill set too, on top of an emerging processing method.
Yeah, and I've heard, like, I haven't been roasting coffee long enough to know like people's opinions or whatever about the different processes. Like I've heard like things about, natural should be roasted a certain way or like whatever. I don't know anything about that, but all I know is like when I taste a good natural, like I'm like, that's a good natural. And like, like, yeah, because I'm really excited about all these cool processing methods and like taking risks in processing, even though like financially, socially, it's very risky. But I think like it's so interesting because like, I don't know. I just think I love fruity coffee and I want more of it.
Right. Well, the industry seems to be on that wavelength as well. So in terms of takeaways from your time in coffee and honing your skills and these tools and everything else, and you could say that you're, what is it, technically 3 years in coffee?
Yeah, I'd say like 4,
3 or
probably
4,
now.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people who are in the coffee industry that are in the similar position. They're new enough to be still like really learning some visceral lessons, right? And old enough in the industry to have already kind of got some, war wounds and some wisdom under their belt. But I'm curious what you would say to somebody in that position who wants to advance themselves in their ability to taste and just, advance professionally in a mindful way, which it seems that you've really excelled in. What would you advise them in terms of next steps and things that they should really lean into?
I mean, I think I'll go back to like the point I made about being okay where you're at. Like, just because you're not in a QC lab all day, or just because you don't have your Q, or you're not a head roaster doing QC on production batches, like doesn't mean you won't get there one day if that's your goal. And like, there are things you can do in your position as a barista or a production worker like me, where you can like still develop your skills, even if you're not practicing them every day. For me, that vehicle was competition, but like, it doesn't have to be like for everyone. Or just like getting involved with like organizations that are doing work to like make things more accessible, or like trying out all the different coffee shops in your town and like figuring out which one's your favorite and why, and maybe like seeing if you can get a roastery tour, talk to the roaster. I don't know. Like I'm 25, like I have a lot of time. And sometimes it doesn't feel like that. Sometimes I feel like, oh, like, especially since I won, I'm like, oh, I have to like figure out my career right now. And it's like, you don't really have to, like, like you don't have to like rush through things, and like all the time, like enjoy the time that you're new and learning. And I mean, coffee is thankfully one of those industries that like no one really knows everything, and you'll always be learning, but it's like, just savor the time that you have where like you don't have to worry about like performing, and like just ride it out. And passion is passion. If you have something you're passionate about, like tasting or roasting or like steaming milk, like just do it as much as you can. And like, if you want to make a career out of it, go for it. I think you can.
Well, you obviously have. And I love the theme there, especially this patience with your process, patience with yourself and your career, that a lot of opportunity out there, there's a lot of opportunity out there that makes us be a little impatient towards that. But like you've demonstrated, when you're not under duress or needless stress, you can actually do a lot better and learn a lot more. Yeah. So when you're now on your way to the Worlds, what's going to happen? How are you preparing for this?
Well, it's funny. I think they like, I think they might have announced like, or for some reason I thought I was competing in Melbourne like later this year. And then like 3 days after like coming back from Boston, I find out it was actually Milan in 3 months. And I was like,
Oh, okay.
okay. I literally like went and told Travis, I was like, it's Milan in 3 months. And then I just sat on a bucket of coffee with my head in my hands, like thinking about my life all over again. And I was like, okay. And like Jeremy takes me outside, had to like talk me down from like actually freaking out. He was like, we can do this. And I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, we have a pretty exciting plan that we've already started doing some stuff, so we'll see what happens. But again, like I'm just trying to get up there and do my best. Just like making it to the world stage is kind of a huge accomplishment I never thought I'd see. So, and I've also like I've only ever been to Canada, so it's going to be kind of a trip going to Europe.
Wow, that's exciting. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, earlier you said, by no means do I think I am the best taster of coffee in the US. But I will say that I think your methods and your mindset toward this and the things that you've done to achieve these have been some of the best that I've heard. So
cool. Thank you.
Yeah, well done. And how can we stay in touch with you and your progress in the industry? Where can we reach out or just like stay tuned?
I post a lot on Instagram. So my Instagram stories, I post a lot of Instagram stories. So it's Julien the person on Instagram, Julien with an E. And yeah, follow me on Instagram, I guess.
Excellent. This has been fantastic to talk to you. Thank you so much, and congrats again. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Okay, everyone. Well, I hope that you really loved that episode, and I hope that you took away some ideas for how to stay focused when you're on the task of tasting coffee and visualizing what's happening in the cup. It's a really helpful tool, I think. I think I'm a little bit more of a visual learner myself, and so maybe that's why I'm a big fan of this technique. But also I love the idea of centering yourself and grounding yourself in the moment, because working on the bar can be very taxing emotionally and mentally. There's so much going on. And if we're practicing grounding ourselves and moving on from task to task and not dwelling so much, just like Julien was talking about, not dwelling so much on the cup that you just tasted, but then giving your all to this thing that's in front of you, just expand that into all of the tasks that we do behind the bar. And when we're dealing with people and with each other, it really could be a game changer for many of us. And we have Julien to thank for guiding us down that path. So huge thank you to Julien Langevin for being a guest on the show. If you want to stay in touch with Julien, you can just follow him on Instagram. That handle on Instagram is @JulienThePerson. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback from me about this episode or any other episode of Keys to the Shop, please do email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. That's also where you can email me for more information about Keys to the Shop consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, coming up here pretty soon in the month of June is Coffee Fest Chicago, followed quickly by Coffee Fest Los Angeles and then Seattle to round out the 2022 calendar. And I really want to see you at these shows. And the reason is that Coffee Fest has been operating for 30 years now. This is their 30-year anniversary. That's 3 decades of what I think is the best event you can go to be resourced, inspired, and equipped to run a great coffee shop and a retail business in coffee, because there's a lot of free classes and accessibly priced classes and seminars and trainings, an amazing community, the trade show floor, of course, connecting you with great vendors to outfit your coffee shop, and all of this, including the competitions like cold brew and latte art. It creates this amazing offering where you get to be energized and inspired and get some of the best thinking out there to help you create an amazing coffee experience for your guests and for yourself. If you want to feel that fulfillment of being a coffee shop entrepreneur and owner, this is a great place to help you achieve that. So if you go to coffeefest.com, you can check out the shows and see what's on offer. I would love to see you all at these shows. I will be there offering some seminars and also judging latte art. So please do say hello. And you can also experience a lot of the great content that Coffee Fest has to offer by going to coffeefest365.com. That's the online learning platform that even if there isn't a show going on, there's always some great conversations and content being put up at coffeefest365.com. And I almost forgot to mention that you can use the code KEYS when you're registering for Coffee Fest to get 50% off your registration. That's for all of the shows in 2022. Use the code KEYS to get 50% off your registration. Go visit them over at coffeefest.com. And with that, that is the end of our show today, everybody. Thank you so much for your time and for your support of Keys to the Shop. I appreciate you all. Don't forget to subscribe and share these episodes. And as always, I do hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.